So we have the stone, we've got the dop, we need flame. So the art of wax dopping is tricky. It looks, I'm hoping I'm gonna make it look easy. It's not that easy though. What I'm doing basically is melting this red wax, using the tweezers to form it, shape it, roll it out, get all the air bubbles out, and get it in the shape I want. If it gets too cold, I can't move it. If it gets too hot, it starts dripping everywhere, and AGTA is not happy with me because I've just made a mess of the table. So I have to, and time constraints. So if I have too much wax, it's gonna make a mess, and my stone's not terribly huge. So this is a little bit too much wax for this stone, but I'll kind of just keep it down there where it's not gonna bother me. And now if I try to wax it without getting the stone hot, it won't work. So the stone has to be hot, the dop wax has to be hot, otherwise they don't stick. But depending on my material, sometimes this is dangerous and tricky because, for instance, if you've got an emerald with an inclusion, you can break it. It'll get hot and pop. So you have to be very careful. Some stones you can't heat, some stones you just heat quickly, and some stones don't matter. And in the case of this quartz, I'm not too worried about it doing anything wrong. So I put the stone in the wax. It's not totally straight. Oh, and I'm put it on the wrong side because I'm going to cut the bottom of the stone, right? Normally I'm doing the crown first, but not today. So we'll take this off, try again. So what I'm going to do, I kind of wish I didn't do that because now I got wax all over the bottom, but okay. Do that again. We're going to heat it up, roll it out, make a point. Now heat up the stone again and wax it the other way. So the wax is great because it dries really, really fast. You know, as soon as it's cold, it's dry and hard. So I've got, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, depending on how hot the wax is. And I want to make sure that it's in the middle and that it's straight. If I wax it and it's like this, I'll cut the entire stone and take it off, and the top and the bottom will not be straight. So it's up to me to see if that's done. And I do the final step in the handpiece, because this way I can rotate it. So I put the handpiece basically to its default settings, which is 0, 0, everything's zeroed out. And I want to make sure that my stone is perfectly lined up with the gear, because just like waxing it crooked, if I put it in here crooked and then I think I'm cutting on the first side, but actually the stone is like that, it's not cutting straight. So I have to, and that's just with my eye. So I eyeball that to see if it's straight. And at this point, my eyeball's pretty good. And then the way that I do the final check, as I spin the stone around, if I see that the stone looks like it's doing this, it's not straight. And I can see that it is doing that. And I want to get a little bit of that wax off that I put onto the pavilion so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Now, normally for customer stones, I don't try to scrape things off of them, but for you guys, we'll make an exception. Okay, so I heat that up a little bit more because the wax is cool now. And I'm just going to very subtly make some small adjustments. And then if it's too cool again, I heat it up a little bit more. And the light is kind of helping me just look at it. And I want to make sure it stays centered as well. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect because I can adjust it later, but that's good enough for now. So I don't know if you can't tell, but from up here I can tell. As I spin it around, it's not doing this anymore. It's not doing this. It's pretty much just the girdle staying parallel with my plane. So that's cooling for a second. I didn't walk you through anything yet. So this is the machine. That's the handpiece, so pretty much all the action's happening there, but I have a couple other little things that we're going to use. We just saw the dopping station, which is basically just an alcohol burner, some wax, some tweezers, and this metal thing that holds the dop so that when I heat it up, it doesn't burn my hand. So that's that whole station. Now this part's really, really important, and that's mostly what I'm going to be using today. So I've got a couple different cutting grits. So one of them's already on here. This is my preforming grit. It's a rough one, so I can cut really, really fast. But then I need to switch to this one. This is a finer one. If I don't switch to this one when I go to polish, won't polish very well. It would take too long. So we'll go through 2 steps. We're going to rebuild the pavilion of the stone, and then we're going to jump to polish. Now, the 3rd step for me is polishing. Notice this one has 2 rings on it. The outside ring is a pre-polish. The inside ring is a fine polish. So for every facet, I have to cut on that one, and then on the outside and the inside. And once we get to the inside, it's done. Or at least one facet is done. But I'm going to do them in groups. So we'll do 1 lap at a time. And that's our plan. So this is cool now. Machine's on. The cutting laps need water. So I'm going to have this thing drip me some water.
Could you share the grits of the various laps, please?
So my rough one that I'm about to use is 100 grit, which to the gem cutters in here probably sounds amazingly rough, but it's a centered lap. So the centered 100 works more like a 350, 360. So it's kind of a normal preforming lap. The beauty of the centered lap, which is just a type of lap that I'm using, is that it's very sort of soft on the stone, so it doesn't pull out big pits. It doesn't gouge the stone. It makes it really easy for me to jump from one grit to another. So I'm starting with a 100, I'm going to 600, and then my 2 polishing grits are 8,000 and 60,000. And I can pretty much polish every single material with these 3 laps. The lap I'm using to polish is normally it's a tin lead lap. That's my favorite one, but that one's also in my luggage. So I'm borrowing a friend's. This is like an experimental new lap. It's a kind of lead-free lead lap or lead-free pewter lap. I've used it before. I know that it can polish quartz. Quartz is a little tricky one to polish. It's not a great stone to do a faceting demo with, but I didn't want to do a sapphire because I knew it would take too long, and that was the only other thing that I had. So I have some other stuff up here, but it's not really that important. Some oil, some alcohol to clean. This is acetone that I'm going to use to clean off the wax when I'm done. A scale, some more dops, and the diamond powder, which I've already mixed to make some slurry, which we're going to see later. And I've got a razor blade, which is going to also come in handy later. So I've got my lap going. I've got my water dripping. Hopefully the water's dripping into this can down here, not on the floor. And we have to choose what we're going to do. So I'm probably just going to cut these 2 sides, the long sides, because we don't have enough time, and I think I can make the stone look really good with just touching those 2. So that's just going to be the top and the bottom, which by my gear is called 96 and 48. So I know already which side I'm going to do because I can see it's lined up. I have no idea which angle, though, and I'm just going to guess. I'm going to try at 60, which is kind of a steeper angle. I want to start at a steep angle and go shallower, but my shallowest angle needs to be around 41, 42, something like that. And if I'm not sure what my angle should be, I look in the book. It's for sale, by the way. In the book, I've got a list, because it's a list that I use all the time as well. At home, I have this list taped on my garbage can, so every time I'm not sure, I pick up the can, and I'm like, okay, quartz, 40.5, critical angle. So that means if it's steeper than 40.5, I get the mirror reflection. If it's less than, window. So we can't go below 40, basically, 41. So I want to be like 41, maybe 47, 60, maybe, if it will work. So I'm going to touch on 60, and I have no idea what any of these angles are. I have to figure it out as I go. So I just do a quick touch on 60, and I can't touch too long because that's a pretty rough lap, and try to see. Yeah, there's no way for me to show you what I'm seeing, but basically, it's a little bit too low. It's a little bit too in the girdle. I'm going to try 55, and I think 55 is going to be perfectly working. So I raise up my plate. So every time I do this, the handpiece has to be flat on the plate. So I have to come up and come back down because I changed my angle. And yes, so I'm slightly higher than one of the original facets. And so this is a super easy cut. If you guys are passing around the book, yeah, look at the emerald cut as you're looking at there, then you can kind of understand what I'm doing. I'll set one up open up here too, just so you can, it's easier to understand this if you can see the pattern. And for me, I can see the pattern in my head and on there, so I don't need to see it. But for you guys, this might be useful. So I'll just leave this up like if it'll stay, yeah. And so I'm just altering these lines. That's all I'm going to do. Here, we'll stick this in here. Something like that. Yeah, that's good. So I'm just going to alter those lines, and I'm pushing the angles up. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do is close that window. So we know that the window was the last two facets, and what I'm doing right now is pushing up the bottom tier so it's a bit bigger, so that when I come to the second tier and push down, it will all balance out and I can change my angles. I know it's a little bit hard to visualize that, but you'll see as it goes. And I also have to make sure that I don't lose the girdle at the same time, because as I'm pushing this facet down, it's squeezing, or it's starting to squeeze the girdle a little bit. Not too bad. Let's see what happens if we...
If you go back to where you were under the light, I'll focus on it, just like you were looking at it.
Yeah, okay. So notice how it looks. Can you guys see this? It looks frosty right here. Notice how the top part looks shiny, bottom part looks matte and opaque. So that's the part I just cut. And notice how it's pretty big. It's pretty far up the stone, which is what I wanted to do. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to jump to my 42 degrees, which is what I want the last step to be. And we'll see what happens at this windowed area, because this is really the part that we're trying to deal with, is around the keel line. So I touch that, and so notice, if we can, okay, the little flash right there, that's my uncut part. It's hard to tell, but there is a little rectangle underneath of it that I just cut. That's 42, and it's not at the top. It's in the middle, which is bad. I can't change the angle to go any shallower because I'll make a window again, but that angle has to push all the way to the top, which means just cutting into the stone. So that's why I wanted to push the bottom up, push the top down, and in the end we'll get, hopefully, not a bad mistake. So I'm just going to keep cutting that. I have no choice but to keep cutting that one facet until it hits the keel line. That makes sure that my window's gone. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the bigger it gets, the more scared I'm getting, because, you know, theoretically, if the stone's really, really flat, it could just go all the way to the girdle, and you don't want one facet from the keel line to the girdle. That's not how stones are supposed to look. So now I've got that all the original facets are gone. And there's not really any flash anymore. There's no sparkle. There's two facets which are too subtle to see on the camera. But yeah, you can kind of see there's a line right there. So that's the bottom facet hitting the top facet. So I just have two right now. We're going to end up with three, but I'm going to do the other side first, because I'm kind of mapping everything out right now. I'm making sure that everything's going to fit. So since I'm already on 42, we'll just go ahead and do the culet facet and just take care of the window. And sometimes it's not possible to close the window all the way. I mean, without really altering the size of the stone. So sometimes you do what I'm doing, you push the facets up, and there's still like one little tiny sliver. And if you can't go any further, if you can't touch the girdle or whatever the case may be, then sometimes you just can't do it, or you can't close it all the way. And if it's a really high-end stone, you're working for your customer, and maybe they say, okay, close it as much as you can without losing X amount of weight or without making it any smaller, and then you just you do what you can do. And the smaller the window, theoretically, the smaller the window, the more the color, the higher the value. Now, that's not always true depending on what kind of a stone it is, but if it's really expensive, then it should be true. Okay, so I just did the same thing. Now I've got the window's gone. Well, there's a tiny little sliver of it left. I've got two facets on this side. I've got two facets on that side. We did them really, really quick. But that's all I want to do with this rough lap. It cuts too fast. I can't do subtle things with it, or else, well, I could do it, but I'll probably make a mistake. So we'll switch over to our next grit.
Could you have started at 42 and worked your way up to the girdle instead?
I could have, and I did it on one side, but I also like to establish straight girdle lines, which in this stone it doesn't really matter, but if I was really going to do a recut, I'm probably going to touch the girdle too, because this stone's a little bit lopsided. So I like to establish a straight girdle line so I know where I can't go under, and then I usually will go to the culet and then work my way towards the middle. The middle step doesn't really matter, it just needs to fit somewhere in between. Of course, it's going to it's going to affect the way that the stone reflects light, but you know, the girdle line is crucial because the jeweler needs that, and the keel line facet is crucial because that's what we're doing surgery on to close the window. Whatever happens in between, in a recut, we just find one that works, you know, find something that matches. So now I'm on a finer grit. Now I have to touch these facets again, and I'm not at all balanced in any way. I haven't set appropriate heights for these facets. There's a middle tier that's missing, but all these things are more subtle, so I'd rather do it this way. But so first we're going to go back and touch the two low facets that we already did. So I'm back on 55 degrees, and you'll notice now you don't hear this one grinding. It's more soft. I can't hear it either. So I'm just cutting over the one that I already did. So instead of it looking really, really coarse and frosty like it did the first time, it looks satiny now. You won't be able to tell, but for me, I can tell. It's very satiny, which means when I go to polish, it's going to polish quickly and not have like a lot of holes and stuff in it. So I'm trying to make tier 1 bigger, and I'm really looking carefully at my girdle line because it's going down, which is okay because it's a little thick, but I can't really go much more than that or else I'm going to lose the girdle. So now I'm going to go to side 2. Do the same thing. So I'm just working on that first tier. This is tier 1, the one that defines the girdle line. And I'm trying to make it as big as I possibly can because that gives me room when I cut into it. Okay, so those two are done. Let's see if,
Back up to the light where you're just looking at
okay. And let's see can we tell a luster difference? Yeah, you can. Notice how the top part looks really opaque and the bottom part looks more translucent, but still a little bit frosty. So that's the difference between the preforming grit and the fine cutting grit. So I got to have everything at the fine cutting grit because that's setting me up for polish. So I've got one facet done. I'm gonna jump back to 42 degrees. So I'm gonna jump to the third step and establish that line. And I'm trying to grow that one a little bit bigger because I still have a tiny, tiny little sliver of a window on one side, and I'm going to try and take care of that.
Why do you think they still cut commercial stones like that? If it's this easy to get rid of the window, is it still just to maintain weight? I mean, it's citrine, it's not really worth it.
Yeah, you know, it's a combination of things. It's hard to say it's one or the other. You know, you really have to like see the factory in action and understand how they work. Not all of them are the same. You know, I've been in Bangkok for the last 6 years and I work with several factories there. Some of the factories are good, some of them aren't. And the way that they pay their workers is totally different. So for instance, if you pay somebody per carat to cut a stone, that means the bigger the stone, the more money they get. And if everything else is equal, they want more money, right? If it takes 1 hour to cut a stone, they want more money for that 1 hour. So sometimes it's the cutters that it's up to. Sometimes the boss is telling them, get the biggest stone that you can. That's all that we care about. Now, the factory in Thailand that I work with, they really understand that like quality makes the price go up, right? Like they can get more money by cutting better. And I'm working with probably one of the most expensive factories in Bangkok to do the cutting service that we offer. And so even my factory manager, you know, he gets this, and he told me he's tried to talk to other factories in Bangkok to tell them, like, if you cut the stones without a big belly and close the window and double your price, people will pay the double price because they won't have to recut it later, or it just looks better, it's easier to sell. And the other Thai cutters or factory managers are just like, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Price per carat. You know, the higher the carat, the higher the stone. They don't understand that like quality is a multiplier, right? It's not just like +1. It's like ×2 or whatever, ×3 maybe. Okay, so now I've got two facets on each side, a low and a high one, a low and a high one. I've still got a tiny, tiny window, but I'm a little scared. Let's see, where are we? I'm a little scared that I'm not going to be able to get rid of that one. It's just a little tiny bit too much. Where is it? See that little tiny sliver of reflection up there, that's the only part of the original stone. Now, sometimes if you have this little thing and you make it really, really tiny, sometimes the light just passes right over it. I've seen stones that are windowed, that have windowed angles that are not windowed. Like my mentor would tell me, he showed me a sapphire, he said, you know, last angle is 30 degrees. And I'm looking at it, and that's a window for a sapphire, but you can't see it. It's just a little sliver, but he was much better at that than I was. Okay, so I have a big step and a small step. I need one in the middle. I've got a 60 degrees, I've got a 42 degrees, so I'm just gonna jump to 50, halfway in between, give it a little touch. Might not be right, but just see where it sits. And then if it's too low or too high, it's too low. I wanna push tier 3 up. So I'm gonna go to 46. So that keeps me 5 degrees away from the third tier, which is usually as close as I like to get. It's good to have some angles in between each step. That might work. So when you're doing recutting, it's all about your understanding basically of how the geometry is going to move. That comes from your experience. So if I see that a facet is growing down, I know that I need to change the angle. I need to move it up. If I see that a facet's going up too fast, the line's moving up this way, and I don't want to do that, I need to change down. The challenge comes whenever you have a hard line that you can't cross, like 42 degrees. I don't want to cross it. And also I can't cross the girdle. So and 46 didn't work. It needs to push up a little bit higher. So I'll try 45. I don't want to get too close to 42 because if the facets get too close in angle, the stone doesn't look good. It's also harder to control the speed of the cutting. But okay, 45 looks good. I'll show you what it looks like in just a second. It's a pretty well balanced 3 tiers. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And it'll straighten out even better in the polishing. So we've got, if I tilt this just right, how do we see it? Okay, so there's a line right here that you can kind of see. There's a line right there that you can kind of see. And then there's tier 3. Tier 3 is a little bit bigger than I'd like, but I think it'll be okay. So 60, 45, 42. I have to remember that. Otherwise, I won't be able to polish. So same thing, 60. And now we're going to do the 45. Now this gets a lot trickier if the stone starts as a lopsided stone. Like if you've got a really off-center culet and you need to balance everything back, sometimes the facets angles can't be the same on both sides because, or you can't afford to do that because you'll lose too much weight. So sometimes you have to have special angles on every side, but if you have to do that, you need to have something to write on, and I don't have anything to write on, so we got to keep it simple here. Luckily, since the emerald cut's so simple, okay, so the emerald cut's so simple, I don't even have to remember my indexes. It's just 2 sides that I'm going to do. Now, normally, if I was going to do this at home, I would recut every facet. I would do the girdle, I'd do the crown, I'd do the table, because right now I'm not even doing the ends, because the ends weren't windowed, but they're not really going to line up very well, because they're all sloppy and crooked from the original cutter. But if I try to do that, we will run out of time today. So, okay, this is side 2, and maybe we can see, okay, that little sliver at the top, that's my tiny little window, so I'm going to live with that, best I can do today. And then you can see one very noticeable line there, and then just a bit above it, there's another line. So my third tier is a bit bigger than I wish, but in polishing, I can still adjust it. No, actually, it looks worse on there. In here, they're all 3 almost the same size, which to me is good enough for today. So I don't need the water anymore. And that's all the cutting is done. So the window's closed, the cutting is done, the lines are straight. Theoretically, they should line up all the way around, but since I didn't do the ends, they're not. But at home, I would do that. So now we're ready to go into polishing. So polishing is a totally different beast than cutting. Cutting is basically just add water. The diamond's already in here. Every lap has got its own grit. Polishing's not like that, though. Polishing, you basically are just taking a piece of metal, which in this case is this lead-free pewter, And if we look at the backside, it's just a piece of metal. There's nothing special about this other than what it's made out of, but there's no abrasive in here. It's not going to do anything by itself. If you try to polish a stone just on here, nothing would happen. It would just get hot. But on this side, where I've got my diamond powder and oil mixture, now the diamond powder that I've chosen is on the lap. And so every cutter may have a different formula that they work with. For me, I like 8,000 and 60,000 grit, so that gives me a really fast pre-polish and a really nice final polish. And with this particular lap, which is why I like it, it will polish quartz with diamond powder. A lot of other laps, harder laps, if you try to polish quartz, it will kind of polish, but it will stay foggy, and you need to really use a different kind of abrasive. Usually people are using something called cerium oxide. It's like a white powder that you mix with water. But for me, I never learned it very well, and I find it to be way too fussy, and I never ever use it. Until I found the lead lap, I just avoided quartz. But now that I have this special lap, it's awesome. Okay, so the first thing we have to do, this has been in a box for like 6 months, so we're gonna just clean it off because I have no idea. This is a test lap that somebody in Pennsylvania sent me to test. I'm the last person to use it, but still, we don't know what's on there. So this is just isopropyl alcohol. I'm just spraying and taking off all my old diamond powder, and I'm not crossing my lines. So I've got an outside ring and an inside ring, and it's very important that we maintain the separation of those two. Otherwise, we can potentially get scratches and all kinds of other stuff. So that's that. Clean enough. Now, with the pewter lap, this isn't lead, but normally it is lead. You have to score it, otherwise it doesn't really work. So this is not the normal razor blade I use. It's a little bit frightening, actually, but what I'm going to do is score it. So I'm just doing a series of straight lines at an angle around the inside ring. So what this is doing is giving the metal a texture. It's giving the diamond a little bit of a place to sit, but mostly it's about the texture. It's creating a very mathematically complex surface, which is good for, at least in my opinion, this is a controversial topic, but the way that I think about it, you think about car tires, right? If car tires are really, really smooth, you hydroplane, it's super dangerous, you don't get traction on the ground. If you put treads in the tire, the car stays, with grip on the ground, and it's something like that, similar idea. It's going to grip the stone, it's going to give it a different texture, and for the lead lap, it's so soft that it really doesn't work without scoring. It's too soft, it's too slow, and I don't think I'd be able to polish this stone if I didn't do this. Other types of metals don't necessarily need scored, but for me, I still do, because I like being able to manipulate how aggressive the lap works, and also I think it makes the polish turn out better. But yeah, as I said, this is a controversial, debatable topic. So I start out with the scoring, and I'm keeping everything separated and clean, even wiping off the razor blade in between, because I don't want the grits to go in. Now, I've already got my grits mixed together. So this is diamond powder, which is just something that you can buy at the supply store. And for me, it's sewing machine oil. So I found this one to be my favorite. It's just the perfect thickness. It doesn't have a smell. It doesn't get rancid. And you can travel with it. And you can find it in any sewing machine store in the world, which for me ends up being important. Other things that I have used, or that other people use, the traditional way was olive oil. So if you look back into medieval or Renaissance text, they're mixing their abrasives with olive oil. But they wouldn't have been using diamond powder at that time, because diamond, until about the 1960s, when they really had successfully commercialized synthetic diamond production, diamond was way too expensive. So everybody was always using other types of abrasives. But today, we've got synthetic diamond. It's very, very cheap. One of these things is about $1 or $2, and they last me about 4 or 5 months, probably. So the cost of the diamond is really, really cheap, and the sewing machine oil is also like $1. So there's hardly any expense with this. But if we go back 30 years or so, diamond is like a novel and expensive thing that even a professional cutter might only bring out on stones that really, really were worth it, like a big sapphire or something like that. But yeah, today it's very easy, and I've just mixed them together to make the consistency that I like. I rub them in there, and then clean off my hands, and I'm ready to go. So all I have to do now is redo the things that I've already done. So remember, I've got 3 steps, 60, 45, and 42 on 2 different sides, and those sides are called 96 and 48 by my gear. So this is where the loop really comes in. If I don't have a loop here, I can't really do this part. I didn't use it that much in the cutting because I didn't need to, because the cutting it's pretty coarse, it's just looking at the lines. But now I'm going to really look at the polishing quality. I want to make sure that all the scratches are gone, shiny, smooth surface, and still make sure that the lines are parallel. So there's going to be a lot of oil coming up, which means I need paper towel. But since I've got 2 different rings, I need 2 pieces so that I don't cross-contaminate. So usually I'm sitting down when I do this. I keep them on my knee. That's where I like to do it, but I'll just keep them here for today. And then I just keep my loop on my finger because I got to look at it constantly. So I got my lap going again. No water this time. Since we've got the oil, we don't need it. And I'm still polishing at a pretty high speed. By American standards, 1,300 or 1,000 RPMs is way too fast. But for me, I find right around 1,000 is like my favorite sweet spot. And I like this machine because there's an RPM meter right on there. Yeah, you guys can see it. So we'll just start on the 96 side. That's the beginning. Make sure everything's lined up. Going to go back to 55 because that was what we found to be the first one. And what time is it? Somebody? 12:30. Cool. So in half an hour, I just did all the cutting and dopping. That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to come down, and I'm not touching. I'm listening right now, and I'm feeling to when I touch the lap. Right there. So I go down just until I touch it, and then I'm going to cut a little bit. I'm going to wipe off the grease. And so what I'm seeing is some of that frosty bit going away, but there's still a bunch of lines and stuff on it. I think, yeah, you see that it doesn't look the same as the other ones. You can't see the fine details, but I can. There's still a bunch of little things on there. So the outside ring, this is my philosophy of polishing. The outside ring, the pre-polish, the only function of it is to take off the skin. I do not care at all if I've got scratches in pre-polish. I don't know if everyone feels this way, but when I see a lot of new people online cutting, and they're like, oh, I'm trying to get the perfect polish at 8,000 or whatever the pre-polish is, it's like, no, you're going to take forever to do that. It's possible, but there's no reason to, because a couple seconds on the outside ring, all my skin's gone, but I got lots of little scratches. Now if I just switch to a couple seconds on the inside ring, if this lap doesn't embarrass me, couple seconds and a little bit of hand technique, and all the scratches are gone. And now I've just got one scratch that I'm working on. So now if I see that I actually have a real scratch, not just leftover stuff from the cutting lap, I might think that maybe I'm getting a scratch by polishing right here. And now if you think about the stone's point of view, if I'm polishing right here, all the diamond powder is just going in a straight line to the right from my point of view. So if I see that I've got a straight line and it's a scratch and it's not coming out, I might think that the diamond powder is either causing that or agitating that. Sometimes it's something inside the stone, but you can get rid of it. So then what I'll do, and I have that right now, I've got one line. So I'm going to come here. So I'm at 3 o'clock now. And now if we think about it from the stone's point of view, the diamond powder is moving up. It's at a totally different direction. So just by changing my placement on the lap, almost always this will get rid of a scratch. And then if that position doesn't work, I'll go to about 1 o'clock. Yeah, scratch is gone. And I've got now, so that was about, 3 seconds on the outside lap and or outside ring, and maybe 6 or 7 seconds on the inside ring. So 10 seconds. And that's my final polish. So you can see, if I get the light just right, where is it? Well, you can see that it's transparent at least. I can't hit the light correctly. Oh, there it is. So notice, shiny, polished, that's done. So 7 seconds. I think if it wasn't a quartz, usually it's 2 seconds on the outside ring, 2 seconds on the inside ring. So now since I'm on 55, I'm just going to switch to the other side of the stone because I've got my plate height perfect. My angle's already set. I'll just go and do the other side. So a couple seconds on the outside ring. That takes off the skin, and as soon as the skin is gone, even if there's a little bit of lines left, which that's happened. So that was like 1 second. Now inside ring. Switch paper towels. Give it a wipe off. And there's still a couple little lines, so a little bit more time. Still a few more. So I change positions because they're not coming out. And they're almost out now, so that works. Not, I would say medium. It's not, I'm not like really pushing into it, but I'm not, I've heard people say like just let the gravity do it. I don't subscribe to that philosophy. If I have a troublesome stone that's giving me a lot of problems, I am polishing as chaotically as I can. I'll sweep really crazy, up and down, push really hard. I'll try everything. I'll try a soft hand too, but almost never does a soft hand for me take out the scratches. I almost sometimes feel like I'm pushing the scratches together. I don't think that's really what's happening, but okay, so that facet's done. And again, we've got a nice shiny surface. There we go. And if I sweep the light across it, you can see it's all polished and there's not really any scratch, or there's no scratches, none that I can see. Okay, so now we're gonna go to step 2. That was 45 degrees, so that's my middle tier. This is the one that I improvised. Was it 45? Yeah, 45. So I'm gonna raise my plate up because now we're at a new angle. I need to reset the height, so I don't wanna be touching the lap, and I gotta make sure all 3 feet are flat. So there it is, 45 degrees. Now I'm gonna come down, double check that I'm still in the right index. Couple seconds to take off the skin. Outside ring is 8,000, and inside ring is 60,000. I've experimented with using 3,000 on the outside, which is another common pre-polishing grit, but I found that 3,000 was cutting too fast, and I was messing up my meat points. I probably could have just slowed the machine down, but instead I just decided to make a finer outline, or a finer grit, and that's what I've come to really enjoy. So this one, skin is taking a little longer. It's a bigger facet. Okay, that's pretty good. So now inside ring, switch paper towels. And this one, I see that the top little edge is not really getting polished. I'm going to just raise my plate up a tiny bit, which is going to change my angle just a hair, and push the facet just up a tiny bit to get into this spot that's not getting polished. For me, as I'm polishing, everything is like, it's an improvisational dance. As I polish, I mean, this is a very simple design. I don't really have to do too much, but if I was doing a normal brilliant pattern where you've got all these triangles have to hit each other and everything has to fit in just a certain way, I'm constantly changing my angle up and down a little bit. I don't change the cheater too much, but if I need to push something left and right, like for instance, if my step cut lines aren't parallel, if I see they're just a hair off, then I'll use the cheater and just squeeze them in just a little bit. And you have to be careful when you do it, but it's pretty simple. And just make little adjustments as you go. So now I'm gonna do tier 2, side 2. So this is facet number 4. And we're taking the skin off first, outside ring. And a little bit more. And a little bit more. Now, since I'm doing this fast, I'm not really paying attention to the meat points and if all my lines are at the exact same height, because it will just take me too long to do that with you guys. But normally at home, I'm looking very carefully at the corners and seeing, okay, the corner line is here, this line's too low, and it's coming up a tiny, tiny bit, and I got to get it perfectly at the corner and then make sure that line goes all the way around. Now, since I didn't cut the ends, I really can't do that. So I'm basically just putting in the facets that need to be there, but they're not really at the right level. I mean, it won't look, when you look at it at the end, I'll have closed the window, and if you look very, very closely, you'll see some little things, but most likely if you aren't used to looking at stones in a loop and looking at meet points, you won't even know. And my customers probably wouldn't know, even though I would not give them a stone like that, but I don't think that they would see it anyway. But for my own sense of, artisanal pride, I'm not going to leave the stone like that. Plus, especially because a lot of times that's what people are giving us the stones to recut for anyway. All the lines are crooked and there's problems, so I don't want to give them a stone that's only half done. That wouldn't be very nice. Okay, so a little bit of those scratchy lines. So I've come over here to try to get a bit of a different direction on the diamond powder. And that looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a haze in the corner, so I'm going to polish a little bit longer. So if you buy commercially cut stones, which is pretty much every stone in Tucson, if you look closely, sometimes you'll see little polishing lines, little corners that are still kind of frosty because the original cutter, either they didn't see it or they didn't have time. They polish all the facets, but then there's like no quality control. They didn't go back at the end and look and see if is everything perfect and go back and fix the mistake because maybe they have a time quota or maybe they know that their customer will buy it anyway or whatever the case is. But for me, when I finish the whole stone before I take it off, I'm going to check everything because every once in a while I go all around and I'm like, oh, I totally forgot to polish that one facet. Like it's completely still frosty. And, it happens from time to time. So the final quality control check is important because if you take it off the dop and then you go to take a photo or whatever and you're like, oh, what is this weird thing? Well, you have to re-dop it and do it all over. So better to check it now. And that's looking pretty good. I'm pleased. This stone is coming out quite well for polishing quartz. I won't embarrass myself. So when you guys do your quality control on my stone, you will be happy. Okay, so that's the second tier finish. So we've done the 60, the 55 and the 45. Now final step, 42. And again, my third tier is a little bit bigger than I wish, but I didn't want to make the second tier too big. It would make the first one too small. So we'll have a little bit of a misproportioned step. I think it's still going to look nice and colorful and bright, which is our whole goal here. Okay, so outside ring, take off the skin. Make sure that all the skin's off. And then inside ring. And just a few seconds usually should do it. Sometimes if you got a really headache stone, a troublesome stone, it's not this easy. Sometimes every facet is a chore. You start sweating and the scratches just won't come out. And it's almost always on the table. You got a big table. You've got one scratch, you try to get it out, and it's just almost there, and you're like, okay, one more touch, it's going to come out, and you perfectly get it, except for two more scratches came in the same time, and you have to do it again and again and again. And, sometimes on a big quartz, or really any stone with a big table, sometimes the table itself can take 1 to 2 hours. It could be. Last year I did a 200 karat morganite, and it had a gigantic table, because that's just the shape of the stone, and that table took me, I think in the end it took me about 4 hours. The first 2 hours I wasn't doing anything, just making scratches, and I was trying different things to get it done. The way that so that stone was about this big, so it was pretty big. And I just couldn't get the polish like this, and I eventually took it off the dop and hand held it against the lap, and just because it's so big, it just needed pressure, I guess. And eventually I did get a really nice polish on it, but it took me the first 2 hours to figure that out. And then the second 2 hours to get the whole thing done because it was so big and it was polishing so slow. And also hand holding is very hard because you can mess it up. And I did mess it up a little bit, but then in the end I got it all flat. So, okay, this one's just about done. Just one little sliver that wasn't getting polished. So one of the things I like about this machine is, well, first of all, picking it up and being able to look at it is great. If you watch any of the other faceting demos in here, you're going to see a lot of doing this, especially on the girdles, because you want to pick it up and look at it, or that arm has to come, and then you're trying to move your head around and get the light reflected. For me, it's very easy. I can just do it like this. So that's one of the things I really like. But the other thing that I really like is the way that the controls are set up. My left hand stays here, so I'm constantly making these little adjustments to the point where it's almost unconscious now. I see that there's a little part that isn't getting polished, or I need to stretch a facet a little bit, and I just automatically adjust. And so when you buy one of my stones, it's possible that all of the facets are at micro different angles because I'm adjusting little things to get it all done, but you would never know. You would never see that. And as long as I don't do that extremely, it doesn't put any of the facets out of balance or anything like that. Okay, so that's tier 3 finished. I've got a little bit of a weird unparalleled line. Let's just try to adjust that a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. So the step cut is really, really subtle. When I'm polishing in different parts of the lap, sometimes that actually does twist the facet a little bit. So if I see that my facet's getting a little bit crooked, I have to either manually adjust it with the cheater or maybe just use a different part of the lap. Now, I just went back to the middle of the lap to try to adjust one of the lines, and all those scratches just came back again. So now I'm going to actually just use the cheater, adjust the rotation just a touch. So the cheater just turns this thing really, really slowly. And then I'm going to come back over here where it was actually taking off all the scratches. And let's see what happens. Okay, that's straightening out the line, but those scratches are still there. So this is like the first real scratches that I've had on this stone that actually came out of nowhere. Those are the ones that we hate, because why are they there? Where did they come from? So now I'm at like the 1 o'clock position. That's kind of like my last secret place that I want to use the lap when I can't get the scratches out any other way. And sometimes I'll actually, move it in different ways. I find that when you have scratches, the more chaotic you are, the better. Because if there is something going on with direction of diamond powder or alignment of cleavage plane or whatever it may be, changing the way that the stone's interacting with the lap helps. And yeah, these scratches are not nice. If I'm getting persistent scratches and they won't come out, then there's a couple other things I'll do. First thing I might do is clean off my lap. Maybe I have a contamination. Usually it just means I don't have enough diamond powder, or maybe I have too much. If I feel that it's not working, like right now, it's not really working, so I'll give it a try, put a little bit more on, and I can just do this on the fly. So I'll just put a little bit on my finger, put it on while it's running, and see what happens. If I polish too much and maybe I've got too much of the diamond dust or this quartz dust that's mixed in with my slurry, maybe I need to wipe it off. Maybe I have too much stuff on there. Some cutters like to be like really, really clean and meticulous with their laps, and they clean them off every time and, put them in the ultrasonic and whatever else they might do. But for me, I have kind of a different philosophy. I kind of look at the lap surface as like an ecosystem, and I'm constantly adding and taking off. I almost rarely ever clean my laps or take them down to the metal. I sprayed it off a little bit with alcohol, but usually at home I never do that because they're always in a controlled environment. So I just wipe them a little bit or add a little bit, and I'm kind of thinking about it like it's an ecosystem. And at first, when you put the diamond powder on there, sometimes you don't get a good polish, and you have to go through a couple of facets, and then everything is kind of, brewing in some weird way, and eventually it gets perfect. And then so sometimes if it's a brand new fresh lap or we've just scored it. Sometimes I'll go through 4 or 5 facets and I'll leave a bad polish on there because I know the lap isn't there yet. And then I'll get to the end of that series, maybe 8 facets, and the last one looks awesome. And then I just go back and do those first 7 for just a second because the lap was, it was building up its environment, I guess. That's how I look at it. I don't know if that's really accurate, but okay, these scratches are being pretty persistent. I'm going to jump to the other side just in case we run out of time, or we're going to run out of time, just to make sure everything's polished. So let's do tier 3, side 2, which is the last facet, and take the skin off. little scratches there. And then once the skin is gone, then jump to the inside ring. And see what happens. So this side's polishing nicely. The other one was polishing nicely until I did something weird. So let's try not to do that again. And what time is it?
If you were to recut the whole entire thing, would you be more careful in your centering to make sure it's very center of the stone?
Not terribly, because with this machine, since I'm going to reset the height on every single side or even every single facet, if your stone's off center, it won't really matter. I'll cut down to the level of the girdle I need it to be, and then when I go to the other side, I'll reset the height and cut down visually. So I'm not using plate height in the same way that a lot of American cutters do, where they're going to leave it at the same spot all the way around. That also doesn't really work on long stones anyway. I mean, even if I wanted to keep the same plate height on both sides, the ends still have to be in a different place because they're longer. So no, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we try to keep it as centered as we can, but sometimes, especially when I'm gluing, every once in a while, I don't know, while the glue's drying, the stone, I walk away and the stone has somehow slid a little bit over, and I come back and look at it and it's super off center, and I'm like, do I want to wait 10 more minutes for the glue, or will I just cut it this way? And sometimes I just cut it that way with no detriment to the final appearance of the stone. Okay, so all 6 facets are cut, but that one still has a bunch of scratches. So what time is it? 55? Okay, the scratches can live, because I want you guys to see the stone and not take too much time. So, okay, all 6 facets are cut. Window is closed other than a tiny, tiny sliver. And at this point, I'm not sure if we'll see that window or not. I think we will see it a tiny bit, but I hope we don't. So, last step, we got to take it off, which means heating up the wax again. So, light that. And so what I want to do, I don't want to take the wax off because I'll use this wax again on my next stone. So I want to heat up the wax, and then I'm going to use the back of my tweezers and just pull it back a little bit once it's warm. That way I'm pulling the wax off of the stone, and then eventually the stone doesn't have anything left to hold it, and it will just fall off. Or I'll pull it off, but I won't pull all the wax, because otherwise I'm going to put the stone into the acetone. The acetone will melt the wax, but then I'm gumming up my acetone with wax, and then I'm also just wasting my wax. So take that off, and then it's hot, but I'm going to scrape it a little bit without burning myself, and just to get rid of some more of the wax. So now that's done. This is too hot to put in the acetone right now, so we'll just let it cool for a second. But so what I'm going to do then, or you can see somewhere, the stone has wax all over it. Yeah, see all that red stuff on there? So, of course, we don't want to keep that on there, but we can see, well, we hope that we can see that there's some more light coming out. So, just cool that down for a second. This is my acetone. This is just, it's just industrial acetone from the hardware store. It's not really the one for taking off nail polish. That one will work, but it's usually watered down a little bit and takes a lot longer. This one should just take a few seconds, and we'll get a clean paper towel. And then hopefully we should have a nice, very reflective stone. So you can see the water's starting to get pink, or the acetone's starting to get pink, and we'll help it off a little bit. Just wipe it. So then we check it. Yeah, okay, that looks pretty good. It's not perfect. I see now that my little 2 ends there's a little bit of a window from the ends that I didn't cut, but that would take another 20 minutes that we don't have. So my final step, glue's off, or wax is off. And since I know that sometimes the acetone does have glue or wax in it from previous uses, I always give it a spray off with the alcohol. That will just take off any residue from the acetone. And now we can see, okay, so what you're going to see my window's closed, but I have two little triangles here that are still windowed from the sides that I didn't cut. If we had an hour and a half instead of an hour, I would do those. And if you look closely, you will see that tiny little sliver. I don't think it's too obvious. It's definitely a lot more yellow, but you guys tell me if I did a good enough job in 1 hour. So if I did have closed those last two triangles, then that's the whole window done. Problem solved. If all the lines are parallel, then everybody's happy. And then I give it back to my customer, and then they're going to give me money for my time to do that. So questions while the stone's going around? Questions?